So we've been hearing a lot about Venezuela in the news. I know that a lot of you are probably wondering what is going on with Venezuela. And when you hear about Venezuela, you're thinking about their current leader. Probably makes you scared of ever visiting Venezuela, which I get. I understand that. I have family that was from Venezuela, mostly living in Colombia now and in Ecuador. And so it's interesting to discuss the topic of Venezuela with people who are very afraid of Venezuela as a country, maybe, let's say. But I think it's important to remember that there were people at that time who were also having interactions with the US all the way back then. And I always find that amazing to think about how people interacted back then. This is why I'm a big proponent of traveling. I think traveling helps shed a lot of just social mental ignorance, if that makes sense. It's something that only travel can do. And I mean traveling out of your state, out of your city, and if you ever get the chance to travel out of your country, which is our country, the US. Awesome, and I think best country in the world, but it's so good to travel the world. I really do emphasize that. So I've been thinking a lot about Venezuela because it's been coming up in the news, and I did some research that I want to share with you because guess what? It's more fun to tell you about the research I did, probably you hearing the research I did, than for you to go and do the research yourself. I'm just guessing that for a lot of you, you don't want to sit and do the research. So here we go. So I want to go back to 1878. Now, we're going to be in the lush coffee lands of a place called Tachira, Venezuela. And I'll put it up somewhere here. For context, this is at the same time. We're thinking 1878. And this is the first telephone exchange in New Haven, Connecticut, which, by the way, I think has some of the best pizza ever in the world. Pepe's, Modern, Sally, And during this time, the phone interactions in the city were basically the start of networked voice communication. So a precursor to today's telecom industry. And you go to this time frame in Venezuela, and in Tachira, you have these six visionaries, and they are the ones that founded a company called Petrolia del Táchira. Again, I'll write that up here. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. But this is Venezuela's first private oil company. And if you look at where this began, you're going to see a collaboration. You're going to see a collaboration between the US and Venezuela all the way back then. So this starts with the earthquake. And the earthquake was called the Cucuta. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's like cuckoo clock, Cucuta, Cucuta earthquake. Someone who's Spanish, correct me here, but the Cucuta earthquake. And this was in May 18th, 1875, and the earthquake was very tragic. I think around 10,000 people died. And what's significant here about oil and this earthquake is that it revealed oil seeps in La Alquitrana, in that area. And these fissures released viscous tar like water, essentially petroleum seepages, and that signaled the presence of oil. Now, it's important to remember that indigenous communities in Venezuela, they had long used crude oil and also used asphalt from these natural seepages. And what they called the substance was mene, M-E-N-E. And to them, it was a vital resource for survival. They used it for medicinal purposes, for illumination. They even used it to caulk their canoes. So they knew of this substance. In fact, they collected it by soaking blankets into these oil pools and then wringing them out. Now, Spain ruled Venezuela for 300 years, from 1522 to 1821. And this is a time frame when the Spanish, you all know the history, the colonization during the 16th century, but they learned of these practices of oil by the natives, and they actually shipped a barrel of oil to Spain in 1539 for Emperor Charles because Emperor Charles had gout. If you ever had gout and you suffer from it, you know. And so they shipped it. I don't know the specifics of how they used it, but it is true that Spain shipped oil back then for Charles V. So oil was known in Venezuela, we can say, for centuries. But that earthquake in 1875, that brought the petroleum seepages to the surface of a place called Cerro Negro. And this was close to La Alquitrana. Now, today, Cerro Negro, it's funny, what is that term in today? That's actually part of the Orinoco Belt. And what's the Orinoco Belt? That's the core of Venezuela's oil wealth today. It's even more significant because with heavy oil reserves that are certified as recoverable, that's the key, they're certified as recoverable. That makes the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela the largest proven reserves globally. So again, you have these six founders of this oil company in Venezuela, and one of them, Manuel Antonio Pulido, is the one who on September 3rd, 1878, he secured a 50-year concession called Cien Minas de Asfalto, because there wasn't an asphalt company. Um, I'm forgetting the name now. Should have put it in here, but there was an New York asphalt company. You can look it up. It was from New Jersey. They were shipping asphalt to the U.S. for roads back then. That's a long time ago. So this guy, Manuel Antonio Pulido, secures these rights to exploit 100 asphalt mines, right? About 100 hectares near the Cerro Negro and the Hacienda La Alquitrana, because that's sort of his area that he knows, but he secures the rights to exploit that asphalt. And this was pivotal because it provided, first of all, the legal foundation for Venezuela's first oil company, and it marked the birthplace of Venezuela's oil industry because it became the core asset for the company's founding, which would be later on October 12th, 1878. So it's a strategic move that without this concession, Pulido and his partners could not have legally extracted a commercialized petroleum. In short, Cien Minas de Asfalto was a legal and geographic anchor for Venezuela's earliest oil operations. Now, this wasn't the standard oil drilling. Petrolia del Táchira relied on natural seepages and shallow hand-dug pits near Cerro Negro, and oil was collected manually and processed in a on-site refinery. These were just using basic distillation systems that were purchased from Pennsylvania. Here's the bridge here. And what they did is they produced kerosene and other light factions with pre-industrial, low-pressure, gravity-fed systems. There was no rotary drilling. There were no deep wells. So again, I'm going to list the six men that were part of this. They were all here. The two that I think of the most are Pulido, who purchased the licensing rights. Basically, he was like the property owner that secured the property rights. I'm always big on property rights because they can kind of show you and navigate where the economics is going. But then there was another founder that stood out that I find was the game changer. He was sort of the scientist of the whole thing, the technical expert of the whole thing. And this is where I talk a little bit about how travel really helps expand your mind. So, out of all of them, it was Pedro Rafael Rincones who, in 1879, he traveled to Pennsylvania. But why would he travel to Pennsylvania? Well, that was the cradle of modern oil drilling. If you don't know anything about the oil industry, just remember Pennsylvania. That's where it started. And he studied the techniques of Colonel Edwin Drake. Why is Edwin Drake important? Well, he didn't just observe, right? Pedro Rafael Rincones wasn't just observing. He was bringing back Venezuela's first drilling rig, mud pump, and distillation system. This was technology developed in the US. This wasn't a Venezuelan technology. Yes, Rincones was Venezuelan, but he was bringing back the technology to do everything back to Venezuela. And that would enable them to produce kerosene at La Alquitrana by the 1880s. So I think it's important to think of Edwin Drake, but I'm gonna go to Edwin Drake in a second. So first, Rincones became Venezuela's first petroleum technician. That's a very important thing to remember. So, from his perspective, he was going to travel outside of Venezuela and go to the US. And he published something called the Petrolia Star. And that was the country's first industry newsletter ever. And it trained the local workers. After his training in Pennsylvania, Rincones returned. Here he is returning with this hands-on knowledge about drilling, refining, equipment operation. These are skills that no one at the time in Venezuela had, and he's bringing them back. So even though the two of them did not actually meet face to face, these were two brilliant minds that were coming together by sharing knowledge. And Rincones was going to bring it back to the people of Venezuela. Let's look at Edwin Drake for a second. So in 1859, that's going even more back, what did Edwin Drake do? He drilled the first successful oil well in, I think it's Titusville, the pronunciation, Titusville, Pennsylvania. And that transformed oil from a curiosity to a global commodity. By 1879, Pennsylvania's Oil Creek Valley, it was the epicenter of oil technology. And Rincones's entire mission was inspired by Drake's success. And this is why the directors of Petrolia del Táchira sent him to the US, to Pennsylvania. So symbolically, if you look at it from a symbolic standpoint, Drake represents the birth of the oil industry in the US, while Rincones represents the birth of oil in Venezuela, linked through the technological transfer and the globalization. Why am I saying all this? I think these types of people that travel across borders to bring technology and knowledge, I think those are the people that I really find fascinating because they're taking actual knowledge that's going to help people. It's going to bring people out of poverty. And yeah, it's going to start some disagreement on the environment eventually, and it's going to have debates on that. But the point is that these men were using science and they were bringing it to people that for years and years and years would not have had the technology that would have gotten a lot of people out of poverty. The question now is, how do we use that technology for good, right? That's the real question. But I wanted to share this about the history because you can have a lot of opinions on different things, but you have to know your history. You have to know your encyclopedic history because that makes you make better decisions for today in the current moment. I love technology. I like seeing how business and technology integrate, and I love learning about business, technology, and history. So this is something fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you never heard of these facts before, now you know. Now you know them now.